Everybody, I'm Jonathan Crow. I'm Director of Community here at Ninja One. Good to see some familiar names in the chat already. Really appreciate you taking the time. We've got a great webinar scheduled ahead for you. This is a topic that we're both really passionate about. And York, I really love that you set this up. I mean, this is really kind of you are the one driving this. And of course, this relates to the launch of our Ninja One Academy, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But it goes broader than that. It goes broader into the topic of upskilling your IT team, why training is so important, especially now with some stats we'll be getting into, how hard hiring is, how important it is to retain your talent and treat them well and give them paths to success. But York, it looks like your Zoom issues resolved. So I'll quit tap dancing and hand it over to you to introduce yourself and talk about our guests. Okay, well, yeah, let's get into it. And I'm going to kick in York. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests. And as you can jump in, please feel free. All right, so with us, very excited to have these three folks, one of whom is a ninja, but they're really all fellow ninjas. So first we have Joe Burns, co-founder and CEO of Reformed IT, joining us from the UK. So Joe, happy afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, yes, thanks for having me on, Jonathan and York. It's great to be here.
Yeah, Joe, really excited to hear your story. You've got a great one, including why training was important to you and what you've developed. So thank you so much for taking time. Next, we got Amanda. Amanda is no stranger to our webinars, to our streams, to the MSP community. She's involved in all sorts of things. I'm sure a lot of folks on this tuning in here have seen her in other places. Amanda LaChapelle, CEO of B4 Networks. Amanda, thanks for taking time out of the morning.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
And then last but not least, we have our very own Lindsay McChesney, our own Senior Director of Global Training and Enablement. Lindsay, awesome to see you here.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Hey, everybody.
I get to talk with Lindsay on other calls. I don't get to do many webinars with you, so this is cool. All right. So we're talking about upskilling your IT. And before we dive into the examples that each of you are going to be walking into and sharing about what your own context, your own journey through why was this important to you and how did you go about tackling this situation? And what's really cool is the three of you have done this in very different ways because your context is different, right? Lindsay's doing this from inside a company that's growing like crazy here at Ninja. Joe is doing this from having launched an MSP in the past and successfully exited that one, and then doing it again, learning from some lessons from that first time. And then Amanda, you're doing this from building your own team, having some restraints in terms of location, in terms of talent, but doing an amazing job of really building out something really robust considering your size and really just figuring things out on your own. And you've done an amazing job with that. So let's start off with why. And York, if you're able to come in again, feel free to take the reins from me. Otherwise, I'll keep going.
You already mentioned it. We launched the Ninja One Academy. So this is also why we are interested in this topic. I mean, not just because of that, but it's obviously a very important topic, training for IT people, especially when we think also about the skill shortage, for example. So having good IT people is super important. And that's also something where Lindsay will talk a bit more about our academy. And yeah, we discussed the topic training also here with all the panel speakers, and we identified some reasons, obviously, why they are very important. So I'm not going to go into super much of detail. Like everyone that works in IT obviously knows that or feels the pain of the evolving technology and yeah, just technology moving so fast. So that's probably one of the major reasons. Then yeah, enhancing the technical proficiency of the technicians, the operational efficiency is a major reason. Obviously, like well-trained IT people will drive innovation by being faster on implementing new technologies also. And in the end, there are many studies also that show that it has a super positive impact on retention because employee satisfaction is typically higher. And then it also has a positive impact on employer branding. So I also had some polls prepared. So I think now, because of the technical issues, we missed a couple of them. But maybe you got can you let the people vote on what is important for them? What we discussed, obviously, the typical challenges is that you need people that really own the training, and you need like good tools and good processes to measure your progress, your achievements. And yeah, the human factor is how to motivate people, drive adoption, and then also you want to like regularly reiterate on your processes.
But I wanted to kick it over to Joe and Amanda and Lindsay. I mean, are these answers surprising to you at all? It looks like we have proficiency, right? Of course, yes. We want to have the people that are working for us be proficient at what their job is. That makes sense. Is there anything surprising about this or anything that you would have ranked differently? Let's start with you, Joe. Oh, sorry, Amanda. We'll start with
I
you.
was going to say I would have rated employee retention a little higher. I know internally it's been a lot of feedback about how that keeps people here, is that they have that ability to grow in what they're learning. I would have thought that would have been a bit higher, but everything else makes sense.
How about you, Lindsay?
I totally agree with Amanda. That was the only thing that surprised me a little bit, is that retention piece, but everything else definitely adds up.
Joe, likewise, or different?
Yeah, I mean, I think retention is important, but I can see why the three hot topics are operational efficiency and speed of evolving technology, and the proficiency side, because with the employee retention, which we know that's vastly important, that ultimately I think people have got their minds on how do we deliver in a competitive market to ensure that we stay ahead of our competition. And that is, one of those important steps is you need to be driving as much efficiency as you possibly can through the team as well.
Absolutely. Let's stick with you, Joe, for this one. The main challenges. Does this match up with kind of your instigation for devoting more time and effort and resources into training? And like, as you're doing that, what you've seen as hurdles?
Yeah, I hadn't actually seen that one because it hadn't popped up. So just
sorry. If you scroll down, so there's a second question. What are the main training challenges? And it looks like we have the options of ownership, measurement of achievements, adoption in the team, and iteration, basically like trying to improve it. And pretty clear winner here, getting folks to actually do the training, to adopt it. That's the top challenge that folks on the call are seeing.
Yeah, and it's funny. I'll probably touch on that during my presentation, because we kind of touch on that point a little bit. So I'll maybe leave the meat off the bones for that one.
Sure, sounds good. Lindsay, Amanda, anything to add there? Does that make sense?
In terms of getting people to adopt the training?
Well, yeah, not necessarily resolving that, but I guess maybe, as Joe pointed out, as you're going through your section too, knowing that a lot of the listeners here, this is a challenge they're running into, maybe something to focus on as we get into it.
Sure.
All right, cool. Thanks, York. I took up some time there. Back to you.
No, all good. Yeah, that was very interesting. So thanks for that. So it's great to have the feedback here live from the people. And this will be also something that we can also discuss further down the line. But yeah, now I'm almost done with my part here. So I just wanted to walk you guys really quick through the agenda. So after this, I will pass it over to Jonathan. He will talk a bit about the benefits of training. So we looked a bit at like pieces of research and polls, what you can find on this topic. Then obviously we have Joe. So I'm super happy that we have this global webinar also with Joe from the UK, and Amanda will present after Joe from Canada. So Joe will talk about his system of the stages of learning, and then Amanda will talk about her learning management system that she also introduced in the context of COVID and of the lockdowns. And then we will pass it over to Lindsay after that, who will talk about her experience with creating the Ninja Academy. So we have this certification program, and yeah, we're super excited about that. And this is also our contribution, obviously, to making training more efficiently, and she will share her insights. And then she will also speak from her perspective as a director of global enablement and training. And yeah, I've been in Ninja since 2018, and so I remember when I started, it was like, "Hi, York, welcome to the team. This is Rob. Please listen to his demo," and then we talk after that. So this was a bit like how our enablement was looking back in the day, and I think Lindsay has obviously changed and built like a global program, and she will share her insights. And yeah, after that, have the discussion Q&A section and also the raffle. So stay until the end to win the prize. And I pass it over to you, Jonathan. And thanks again for jumping in with the introduction.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. What is the prize, by the way? I don't think I remember. Do you remember? Maybe JP can put it in the chat too. Just want to know what we're playing for. All right, there's one other comment before I move on. Stuart, great comment. And this is something that in our prep that Joe specifically has an amazing answer for. So he's going to get into that in a second. Stuart's comment, for those who aren't looking at the chat, I found that with some employees, the more people learn, especially when provided reimbursements for certs, they sometimes are using that to move on to higher paying jobs in other industries. So yeah, that's a great concern, very relevant, and it's one that we're going to address. Okay, so benefits of training. I'm not going to go reading through all these. I mean, I think a lot of these are things that we know intuitively, right? Like we want to believe all these things. It makes sense, but seeing some stats from actual surveys and studies is beneficial, and it actually does help when you are trying to show the value of these things and reporting to leadership, et cetera. And it kind of jives with what we're talking about, right? In terms of what were the big things that people are hoping to get from training, that increase in efficiency and productivity and proficiency. So just some stats here. Hopefully these are useful if you're trying to make the case for training. Training can help with not just performance, but engagement with the job and retention, like Amanda was calling out to. So those are some of the benefits of training from the business owner's perspective. Also, York, I think you already kind of hinted on this. This is something I see too. I look at a lot of MSP websites and just company websites in general. And when you're trying to attract talent, people are going to go to your website. They're going to poke around. They're going to notice how you're referring to your employees and the opportunities you're offering. It goes beyond just offering the things like, the standard kind of benefits, and goes into, I've seen some people do some interesting things showing, hey, we have clear career tracks. We're investing a lot in our employees and our team. And I think that is a great way to differentiate. So as we can see, some more benefits there. All right, so let's jump into Joe. And actually, Joe, I think you mentioned that you would prefer to have your deck, right?
Exactly. I think Joe will share his screen. He has his deck, exactly, and then we continue with Amanda.
All right, cool.
Yeah, you find the correct window. Just make sure
and while you're doing that, Joe, I just want to tee you up a little bit. Like, I'm super excited to have you here because you've got a great story to tell. And so before you get into showing a little bit of a piece of, hey, here's what training actually looks like at your company, a little background would be awesome.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so just for context for everyone on the webinar, so I basically started my first. I've been in IT ever since I left school, and I started my first MSP back in 2005 when I was 21 years old, and 11 years later in 2016 we actually sold that business. So the one thing that I talk about a lot, and I take it the screen share is actually working. Yeah,
it is. Yes.
Yeah, cool. So on stage here, I was on an MSP day in Italy, talking about all my experiences having built and sold a business, and starting again as another MSP in 2019, where I co-founded Reformed IT with a couple of guys who I was working with in the last business. But I constantly talk about all the lessons learned from the mistakes, the hundreds of mistakes that I made the first time around. you know, but we were talking on some of these pre-calls about the importance of training and skills development. And one of the things that we recognize from the previous MSP to this time around was the fact that, you know, we didn't put a lot of emphasis on training development in the previous MSP. Well, we did, but we wanted people to do it during their own out of hours time and things, because we were so busy. And so the difficulty was, and it was one of the points in the poll, was getting that commitment from people. If you're asking people to do training outside of normal working hours in their own personal time, that's eating at their own, that's their own lifestyle, then you're eating into. So one of the things that we did in Reformed was make it very clear that skills development was important to us, and that we set aside time during the working week for skills development in particular, so that people had focused and dedicated time during their week to make sure that they've got continual development going on. And again, we've seen a lot of this in the chatter already, but there's the famous quote, you know, what if I train my employees and they leave? And we've already seen that a few times in the chat. And the common answer to that is always, well, what if you don't and they stay? Because ultimately, the way I like to kind of point this out is that we at Reformed want the best people. You know, we want the best skilled people so that we can have all those things that came up in the poll, such as operational efficiency, you know, being the best at the technology that's emerging. We want all of those things. The only way we're going to do that is if we can build those skills into our team effectively. That fear of training somebody up so that they'll be well skilled enough to leave the business will hold the business back in the end. Yes, there is a possibility that people can go off and get other jobs elsewhere, but if you don't train your team in the right skills, then you're just left with an unskilled workforce, which is not going to deliver operational efficiency. It's not going to be on top of the latest tech. So you're not going to deliver the best possible value to your clients. And for anyone from an internal role, an internal IT team, same thing's going to apply, but it's just going to be that you don't have that same service delivery with your internal team. So yeah, I think that's really important to know. The other thing that we talked about is the 4 stages of learning. So I've got a random photo here, just a bit of backstory, random photo of me on a flying lesson. So I'm doing my private pilot's license and I'm doing a load of flying lessons. What has that got to do with IT? Absolutely nothing, besides the point that I'm making regarding the 4 stages of learning, which I'm going to relate back to how that has been adopted, or you can think about it from my flying lessons, and equally for anyone that you can relate it to when you start to learn to drive as well. So the 4 stages of learning, I've got to be completely honest, I just stole this off another presentation. I learned this at another point. It's another webinar, and I thought, oh, this is really good. We're going to implement this into our business. So hopefully some of you think that it's useful and you go ahead and implement this. But if you do Google the 4 stages of learning, you'll find lots of context around this model. But we all start essentially as a novice. You know, we like me, learning to fly, which is pretty important. You don't want a novice flying you anywhere. That is not a good thing to happen. So when you go through your journey, or when I was starting to do my private pilot's license, I started as a novice. I knew absolutely nothing about what I needed to learn. So I had unconscious incompetence. I didn't know what I needed to understand. I didn't know what I needed to learn at all. And at the novice stage, what you typically have is you have a trainer, my instructor. They do it and I watch. So the very first time you take off, when you're doing a flying lesson, you're not expected to get on the runway and take off yourself. The instructor does it, and they get you to just follow them through, to watch what they're doing and how they're doing it so you can pick it up. And they'll do that a couple of times so that you can get the hang of it. Now, once you've done a few flying lessons, you go from a novice to an apprentice. The difference with an apprentice is you've now got conscious incompetence. What that means is I suddenly know that I need to pass 8 or 9 theory exams. I know what I need to learn about meteorology, the dynamics of flying, air traffic control. I'm now aware of all of the things that I need to learn, which I wasn't before. So I'm now starting to develop and train on a focused area. And with this, you've still got this element of the instructor is going to do it, but I'm going to help. You know, I'm going to follow through. I'm going to do a bit of the controls. You know, I'm going to be learning by being involved. The air traffic control, I might say the odd thing, but I'm not going to do the whole conversation. So you're starting to help out, but you're not expected to do the whole thing yourself as a learner. Then you develop to journeyman. Okay, this is where you've got conscious competence. So it's a bit like when you're learning to drive. When you're learning to drive in that first instance and you start to be able to do it, you can do it, but you have to think everything through. You know, if it's a manual car, big in the UK, so I've got to think about the clutch, the gears, the accelerator. I've got to, you know, I've got to think about mirrors, steering, everything. But you're constantly thinking that through because you're just learning it. It hasn't like sunk in properly yet. So you have a conscious competence. You know how to do it, but you're thinking about it. And at this point, again, with the instruction, whether that's driving or my flying, my flying journey, is that now I'm doing it. So I'm in control, I'm doing it, but my instructor is telling me and helping me and guiding me through that process. And that's where I've got to from my flying journey. I'm by no means at the next level. The next level is master. Okay, this is somebody with unconscious competence. So you may relate this to driving again. Once you've passed your test, you've been driving for a while, you don't think about it anymore. You could be listening to the music, you could be talking to your passengers, you could be eating a Twix, all at the same time as being able to drive and control the car. No problem. You're doing it completely unconscious because you've become a master of that particular skill. And it's the same with my instructor. My instructor does all of this in the flying lessons completely unconscious, knows how to do everything. I have to think through every little task that I do. He doesn't. He just does it instinctively. The other good thing about a master, you're a master when you can teach a novice or an apprentice. So that's the level you need to be. You need to be able to teach somebody else how to do it. And that's then a case of you do it, and as the instructor, the trainer, you just watch, right? So it's like you crack on, I'll just make sure everything's okay. So once we understand those 4 stages of learning, the next thing is to think, how do we adapt that and adopt it into our businesses? And the way we've done that is we align our skills matrix for all the different skills that we expect a technician to have against those 4 grades. And then furthermore, we then link that to our Halo PSA system using skills-based routing and qualification matching, so that we're only passing the right support incidents and the right jobs to the right people who are journeyman and master, not somebody that's a novice or an apprentice, because they're not capable of doing it without watching somebody else doing that particular skill. So this is how you can almost learn to implement a training program into your team and then make it linked to some form of output. So how do you make it linked to something that you're doing on a day-to-day basis? And that's about me on time, so I'll shut up because I've ranted for 10 minutes straight. So hopefully that's useful. Happy to answer any questions later on during the Q&A.
Well, you're almost off the hook, but there's a couple of questions that came in, I think, that are super relevant. It would be great for you to answer now. So let's see, I'm going to go to the Q&A here. And everyone, feel free to use the chat if there's something that's really burning. You want to make sure we don't miss it because the chat's super active. Thank you all for that. You can go to the Q&A. So this is from Mike Ogle. Hey, Mike. Mike is asking you, Joe, what percentage of a given week do you recommend devoting to training? And maybe applying this, my own follow-up question, applying that to the model there. You've got your masters. I would imagine that your master's time is worth more in some cases than a novice's time. And a master is training too. So like, how are you allocating your master excuse me. Just like kind of measuring, okay, our master's time devoted to a client in an issue versus devoted to training, and how you're kind of like deciding where it goes where.
Yeah, so yeah, going back to the point of novice apprentice, as you're going through the journey, obviously that applies to every skill. So it isn't that you become a master at everything, because you can't. It applies to all the different skills. So there's always something that someone might be trying to improve on and better themselves on. But yeah, you do find that the novice and the apprentice, they need more training time anyway across the board. So you do tend to designate more training percentage of the week for those novices and apprentices that are developing those skills. Once you get up to, you tick off if you master like you're at master level on quite a few skills, there isn't then as much to do. So you, and as you say, the time is valuable for customers. The one thing is we essentially do a minimum, so it doesn't matter what level you're at, we do a minimum of half a day of training per person per week. So yeah, that's what we designate as an absolute minimum. But when we're novice apprentice levels, when we're taking people on like that, they're spending more like maybe 50%, 50, 60% of their time is spent training, because we need to get them to the right skill level where they can add value and actually do something on their own without, you know, being sat next to somebody.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. All right, let's keep it rolling and go on to Amanda. So I'm going to pull up your slides here and just direct me. I mean, Amanda, you know me. You don't have to be polite about it. You can just tell me to move on. Okay, so let's get your slides up here.
I just heard Jonathan said I could boss him around. That's all I know.
I don't think you needed my permission for that. I don't think you were waiting for it either.
So yeah, the animations didn't pop over, but that's okay. So I'll walk through each one of these things. As York mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we kind of got hemmed in by COVID in terms of the way that we usually trained people was very much sit beside me and watch what I do. And in Canada, the lockdowns meant that everybody had to work from home, and that was no longer possible. And we acquired a company in January of 2020, which meant acquiring an extra 150 clients. So I needed more staff, and I had to consider how I was going to bring those staff on and kind of get them, you know, up to speed on what we need at B4. So it kind of started with creating content, and then, you know, realizing that that's going to be hard to track and measure and scale. So I ended up building out my own learning management system. So we break our training down in 3 different ways. The core training is what we have as 3 different parts, which is the required, policies, and the base tools. So required is like the government has certain trainings that we have to go through, the employee manual, just stuff that, you know, legally we have to do. The policies are internal processes that all of our employees are required to understand and adhere to. So some are broken out by role and department. Some apply only, you know, to specific employees. Some, like most of them, apply to everybody. There's also some extras thrown in there in terms of balancing your mental health and well-being at work, how to speak up for yourself, customer service training, like handling VIP or irate clients, teamwork, but a lot too has to do with the B4 way. So that could literally be anything on how we expect you to handle certain situations or perform your role, and delivery of service. The base tools is exactly what it sounds like. This is for the tools that we use on the everyday. This entire training that you see in the core stack, this is part of your initial onboarding into B4. Now, that being said, everybody's at a different technical level that we hire. We do have a bit of an issue in terms of our geographic area and getting talent. So one of the things that we've done is kind of just acknowledge that we're going to hire young. We're going to hire them in college while they're still in college or just coming out of college. Or we're going to hire sometimes even in high school. And that requires us to identify what technical skills, if they didn't have any of the traditional learning, that they would need to have, and give them the opportunity to do that. Anybody who knows me from LinkedIn knows I'm pretty passionate about women in technology. And one of the things that we find super helpful to help create this workforce where we have more than parity in our staff of women is to be able to provide that training. So we use internal and external. Some of the internal stuff that we've developed is based on, you know, how we would want to see it done. So like there's ways to do things that are technical, but there are, you know, different delineations that happen based on, you know, what we determine as the best standard, right? And then there's external partners that we work with that provide, you know, like A+, Network+, that kind of training. But we manage all of that in terms of our learning management system so that we can track who has what training and where they're at in their journey. One of the things that we, you know, ran into that we were like, oh, this is going to be a problem, is that, like, this was my project to do. And I was like, oh, it's great, it's all done. But wait, no, it's not, because you can't ever stop learning, right? You have to keep creating content. And I am not a full-time instructional design person, and that is not something that my MSP can scale. So, you know, I had to consider, what is it we're going to do? So one of the things that we instituted was this idea of continuous learning and doing like making the most out of every situation. So we have a morning huddle. Every morning we start out with, because we have some staff that are working from a satellite office, we start out with a morning huddle, and you know, 3 days a week there is a theme that focuses on learning. You know, one has to do with like mental health, there's leadership themes, there's one on customer service, and then on our Fridays we also have time where we share any automations that we've built, whether they be personal and or for something in the company, so that we're highlighting what it is we're doing to learn and grow. We have lunch and learns. The people that Joe highlighted in his you know, journey as being masters, we actually asked them to step up and be a part of the learning journey and teach somebody else something. And then while we're doing that, and we're recording it so that we can include that in the LMS, so that any future employees are able to, you know, benefit from that. And the same is true from the daily huddles. Those little nuggets are put into like a training library that people can access. And then we also have training groups. And I know this probably sounds like a lot of time dedicated to training, but as I've been very vocal in the chat, like we actually didn't at all focus on that. And we ended up finding ourselves woefully behind in terms of certain technologies. And it was been a bit of a journey to not only look at, you know, having young staff and building them, but also to make sure that we catch up. And, you know, I don't know that we're 100% caught up yet, but it's something that we're being very intentional about it. And doing something like this, even if it's quick and dirty, it's just PowerPoint slides and you don't have to make it fancy, right? Having a training that removes that necessity. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words. It's like a thing for today. Of having somebody sit side by side with someone helps you with your productivity. I'm ready for the next slide, Jonathan.
All right. Oh, you were so nice about it.
I can be nice about it. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about here was the considerations that I feel like people should be thinking of when they're, because this is going to be different for each person, right? You're going to look at this and go, I don't have time to do that. I don't have the skill set to do that. And I mean, that might be true. It might look different for you. And whatever the solution ends up being, you know, that's going to be what you need it to be. But what I want you to consider are these things. So the first one is balance. As Joe highlighted, like you need to build in time for training. You can't just say to your techs, you know, you can take time during the week and use it for training. You actually have to book it for them because they're always going to prioritize clients, right? You need to make sure that's in their schedule and in their calendar, and that they know that they have your support to do so. You need to consider the how. I mean, for us, having the LMS means that we can tailor our content to better serve how someone learns best. I've seen some people have entire video libraries and just do video. You have to think about the current makeup of your staff and what it is that they appreciate. Sometimes people are, you know, visual. And if you have all visual people, then you kind of have your mandate from there. So just consider, you know, what you currently have in house and maybe what you want in terms of your staff profile. The structure. So for us, that's the LMS. But the LMS is not like, doesn't come pre-structured. You have to decide how you segment your training. And then you can do things, if you do that and you are intentional about it, like what Joe is talking about, where you can have all of those match up, the training match up to the skill sets that you've identified in your PSA like Halo, and then tickets can be assigned based on that. The incentives, that's really easy. It's how you motivate your team, right? Everybody's motivated in a different way. I was kind of trying to allude to this in the chat, but really when you're hiring people, you should be looking for someone to work at an MSP that's hungry and curious and likes to learn new things. And then your challenge is not necessarily, you know, how do you keep them? As long as you keep them learning, then they're getting that itch scratched. That's the thing that keeps them in their space. The people who are motivated by learning, and you can usually tell who they are, they're very curious people. They'll want to stay in an environment that provides them for this. I know that I've got staff that are much the same way. They like the freedom to be able to explore and learn new things. That's why they got into IT to begin with. And then the last one is just, measure them. How do you know that your training is effective? Is it working? Is it doing what you want it to do? So you have to consider when you're making it, how you're going to do that. How are you going to know that you were successful in the goal? Because if you're going to put the time into it, then you want to know that you're getting the ROI on it. That is my slides.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to actually stop sharing and we'll come right back to this, but I want to get into a little discussion here if that's okay, York. Also, York, I was wondering, I know we had a couple other polls that we didn't get to at the very beginning, just asking people if they had their own formalized training programs, and then how they would rate satisfaction. JP, can we launch those polls even though? Awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think this would be informative. But Amanda, a couple questions I had, and then I think maybe there's some folks in the audience too that have some. So when you're saying that these are the things that you developed, what I think is really cool about the continuous education part of it, especially, is you've basically tasked other people on your team with sharing information, but also you're in a sense like training them and giving them more reps to become good trainers, really. So that's one way that you're kind of approaching scalability, which is nice. But when you're putting this stuff together, is this all you? Like, talk us a little bit more about how these things were built and where the information is coming from. Because as you say, you can get an LMS, but that's not, you don't just get the tool and then your job's done.
No, I think, look, I would be remiss if I sat here and said, it's all me. I did it all by myself. I think because I already do teaching outside of my everyday job, I have an understanding of how lessons are built and how you can obtain actual learning. So for me, I always approach the structure of the education that we make, but I always go out to my masters in my organization and get their feedback on whether or not I've hit the right notes, whether I'm missing something, and what should be included. I don't need them to come up with the lesson because I'm going to do that. I just need them to tell me if the content is right, if the content meets what we need. And that is a group effort. That's not something I've done on my own. And in fact, the idea for the morning huddle themes and, recording those trainings, that's the co-owner, my husband, Brian, that came up with that one. So it's kind of a group effort. And really, if you build a culture of learning, it will come.
And are these things too, is this tied to, the approach to documentation, for example, and just having standard operating processes where you do a task a certain number of times, you should document it so then other people can follow that and learn. I guess in terms of like basic steps towards building your knowledge base, I assume that things can be built from that, but it sounds like it's going a step further, right?
Well, I think if you're going, like anything, you should probably consider where your pain points are first, right? If you want to get the most out of something, you think about where do we have the most issues in terms of training, alignment, whatever the case may be. If it's a skill set, if it's customer feedback, whatever the case may be, you start there because then you're going to get the most bang for your buck, and you're going to get adoption just by people wanting to participate in it because they've seen the difference, right? So if you don't know where to start, I'd start there, and then I'd think about the structure overall, about where you'd like to go, and then kind of color in as you go along.
All right, one last question for you, because I see people in the chat are sharing resources and outside external experts and training programs and things, which is great. And so you mentioned, I know when we were talking, I think early in the webinar, but also in our prep calls, you certainly have some outside things that you point out to, but you tend to put your own, you bring it into the own context of like, okay, here's the external resource, but here is some additional context of how we apply that here and kind of apply it to your own culture, the Be4 way and all that.
Yeah, I think that's important because we've all done even tool set training where you go through and they're like, this is all the things the tool can do, right? But what do we do? What do we use? Like, that context is important. I think one of the things that was missing when we did shadowing only is that people would have to grab that context very quick, and there wasn't always time. This way here, it gives that context of what's possible, what we want to be possible, what we allow in terms of our structure. And it removes that, you know, well, I just learned about these 10 things that I can't do. That was a waste of my time. Like that's a huge complaint that we had with the former ticketing system that we were on. Is people would sit through the training and go like, but how much of this am I actually going to use, right? So keeping it relevant isn't just important for the time factor, it's also important for employee engagement.
That's great context. Okay, let's kick it over to Lindsay, right, York? Because I think with time wise, we want to make sure that Lindsay shares your perspective. And Lindsay, you're coming at this from a completely different, well, not completely different, but a different angle of in two ways, really. First of all, we are a vendor, we provide a tool, and you've been working really hard to build training and documentation around how to use that tool. But then you're also approaching it from, these are resources that Ninja internally we use as well. You're working with HR. It's a different kind of experience. So yeah, let's kick it over to you, and you can share your background and your story.
Absolutely.
Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. Before we do, let me share the results. So yeah, York had these questions, and this is great level setting. We're supposed to do this at the beginning. Just this is great to know that the majority of people here on the call in the audience, there's no formalized training program. So coming here, learning from others who have one. So I'm really glad we put this webinar together. And thank you, guests, for coming on and addressing that and giving a good example. And then how effective is it for the folks who do have it? Middle of the road. So places to improve. So hopefully we're sharing some ideas of how to do that. All right, cool. Lindsay, I will bring up a slide and you can take it away.
Sounds great. Hey, everybody. And yeah, like Jonathan mentioned, definitely have a large scope here at Ninja, from customer enablement to internal training. There are 6 different branches of my team here at Ninja. So have a lot of different perspectives from that perspective. And I think that I also, to give some additional context, I started with Ninja back in early 2018. So I've been here for about 6.5 years now. And when I started at Ninja, I think I was employee 40 something. So we were a much smaller team than we are today, where now I think we're coming up on somewhere around like 1,500 people. So there's been a ton of growth that I've seen over the past 6.5 years, and a ton of changes to the way that we approach training because of that. So one thing I do just want to start by talking about, you've heard it a little bit throughout this webinar already, but we did recently launch our Ninja One Academy. I have to take my hat off to the customer enablement manager who works with me here at Ninja. His name is Jim Resch. He did so much in building out this program, and he's done it before at other companies. He's a pro in putting programs like this together. So we were really excited to finally launch that just a couple of months ago. For those of you who may be wondering, while we offer one technician level certification today, we are continuing to work on building out more content. We're now going to be focusing on adding some administrator focused certifications next up. I don't have a firm timeline on when those will be available, but I'm hoping for late this year, early next year. So stay tuned for more information about that. And we love your feedback. If you have any feedback as far as what you'd love to see in the Academy, please send it over to your account manager, who will route it over to us, or you can submit it through the, there's a feedback form actually within the Academy as well. One quick note, if you're wondering how do I get to the Academy, if you're not already an Academy user, reach out to your account manager and they'll be able to get that enabled for your account and send you over instructions for how to access it. And with that, let's shift to talking a little bit more about some internal training. So I want to go over a few different best practices in some of the areas that we pulled on earlier within the training. The first thing I'll be talking about is going to be ownership. So I want to start by talking from the perspective, we've talked a lot about MSPs. I know that we have some folks who work in IT as well. Some people may even have dedicated training and enablement, if you're lucky, or HR people that you might work with to help build out training. Even if you have that, you can still really work to take ownership of your team's learning needs. From what I saw in the poll, it seems like that's probably not a ton of you out there, but if there are any of you out there who have those resources that you can work with, a few tips that I would have for you is to, even if you have that staff, just perform frequent pulse checks with your team to identify their comfort levels with the skills and information that they need to do their jobs, and communicate any gaps that you're finding early and often. I think that's something that's so important to continue to foster, like Amanda's talked a lot about, the culture of learning as you move forward with your teams. Another thing too that has come up is just document processes as much as possible. Sometimes you have to get scrappy, whether you have an HR or training person that you're working with because they have a lot of people that they're probably supporting, or whether you're doing it yourself. As much as you can record and document any scenarios that would be helpful to disseminate for training, I would highly recommend that. When we were earlier on in Ninja, and even today, but especially earlier on, we relied a lot on, similarly what to Amanda mentioned, just putting together a video library of recorded trainings that could be accessible for the future. And similarly to that, we relied on a lot of internal documentation to be able to help with learning. And then even if you don't have, which is probably the case for many of you, dedicated HR training folks that you're working with, all of these things are still very relevant. I think starting by just hitting that record button on a Zoom session is a great place to start building up some training content that you can use for your teams moving forward, and even that you can implement into onboarding. Keep in mind that while it can sound daunting to implement a formal onboarding process, and I'm sure some people think like, man, do I have the time to do that? One thing that you can just do in the very beginning that helps to take away the amount of time that is landing on masters or people who are going to help facilitate onboarding with new hires is to just record those sessions and have a little bit of a mix of some self-paced learning. Even if you're not an instructional design person and you just have to rely on that recording or documentation, that can help to free up time instead of having the masters repeating themselves every single time a new person starts and facilitating the same training live over and over and over again. You can save their time for Q&A or that more engagement that is really beneficial to have them sitting there live with a new hire instead. I know I've got to get through here for time, but for measuring achievements, I think this is a big one again that I've heard folks talking about. So one thing that I would highly recommend is before you do anything from a learning perspective, your first question should be, what result am I trying to get? Take it from me as somebody who's learned from my mistakes of sometimes just jumping straight into what training do we need to provide. And then you're trying to look back and think, how do I measure this? How do I find out if it was effective? It's a lot harder to do that looking back than if you just start from the very beginning with a very clear goal for what exactly it is that you're trying to achieve and how you're going to measure that. So that would be my number one tip for measuring achievements and measuring results. I know adoption was another really big one in the poll that we talked about as well. The number one thing from my perspective for adult learners is often reiterate the why or the what's in it for me when you're doing training. I think that really helps folks, especially adult learners, be able to understand the reason that they should be listening and then the reason that they should be implementing this moving forward if they understand how it's going to benefit them personally. And the second thing I would suggest is, again, from an adult learning perspective, reinforce. It would be great. I think Amanda said earlier, like, oh, okay, look, I've put this together. The learning is available. My job is done. It would be great if that were the case. But the reality is we need to be reiterating learning if it's going to stick. And that doesn't have to be hard. It sounds scarier than it is. Even just in your team meetings, if you have some bullet points for yourself or for your different teams to be covering, to reiterate the learning that they've received recently so that they're hearing it over and over again and getting that refresher, and it's making it more embedded within your culture, that can be a great way to reiterate the learning as well. And I think I can go here, yep, to the next slide. Thank you so much, Jonathan. The final thing I just wanted to cover is just a little bit of information about how we've adapted to change at Ninja One. Like I mentioned, when I first started at Ninja, it was a very small company. It was pre-pandemic, and because of that, our initial onboarding program that we rolled out was I put together a physical training manual, and we did a training program for a week-long training program where we went through that manual together. Everything was instructor-led, and we then disseminated that as a PDF when we had remote hires. But this was a lot easier to do back then because most of our new hires were starting out of one office location. We got very lucky that just like 2 or 3 months before the pandemic hit, just because of the scale of our company, we had adopted an LMS and started plugging everything into e-learning. So that didn't wind up being as scary of a transition for us as it could have been. But I would say that as a company scales, leaning on e-learning, Zoom recordings, like I mentioned, just more of those on-demand resources, however that looks for you, is really important. Another thing I want to call out there is if you're a small team, lean into free resources, hit up YouTube. You might not be the expert in every single thing that everybody on your team needs to know, and that's okay. If you can do something like Udemy, there are so many different tools. I'd love to hear more in the chat. I think some of them have been dropped here, but there's so many different tools that are available that offer pre-canned learning that you can lean on so that that entire burden doesn't fall on you. I would highly recommend that for scaling teams as well. And then for our post-pandemic world, kind of where we are today, again, we've had a lot of growth, but now where we've landed is a much more hybrid approach now that our offices are back open. We do some instructor-led training, but we also do a lot of e-learning, a lot of Zoom calls, and we still do have that shadowing and reverse shadowing component for essentially every single team as well. I think it's just helpful to have a mix of all of those different things in your approach. All right, and that's it for me. I hope I didn't talk too fast there.
No, that was great. Thank you. And I know you were on a bit of a time crunch there. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Okay, York, I know we have some unfinished business. We got to get to another shout out for the Academy. We had some people in the chat saying that they've already been doing that, and that's great. And others asking how they get access to it. You can talk to your AMs. We also have that slide that I can try to bring up again with the QR code. But we have some questions real quick there in the Q&A. I'll take the first one, and then York, do you want to tee up a couple other ones too?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. And then we have to announce the raffle winner, of course. Okay, so Nick, thanks for putting this in the chat and in the Q&A. This was addressed, Amanda, I saw you respond to this, but curious to get others' thoughts. Recommendations for skill tracking tools. We have a team source spreadsheet that is a categorized list of all the relevant skills we need on the team. And we plan to have the team self-assess their skill levels and use this baseline for tracking improvement over time. You kind of, both of you, I think Joe and Amanda, you mentioned having something sort of similar. But yeah, what are you using? Do you have something more than the old Excel sheet?
That's what the LMS does for us.
Cool.
It enables us to do that, and the managers are able to see what training people have done and then match that.
And you also mentioned using Halo too, right?
Yes, yeah, we do the same as Joe, where we match up the skill sets to what they're doing, and it doesn't mean somebody can't do a ticket that isn't part of their skill set. It just means that it should go to that person first. So it helps the people who are triaging to be able to do that. Halo is fantastic.
Anything to add there, Joe?
Another endorsement for Halo. It has been great implementing things like that from a skills routing point of view. I think one of the other points around it, not just the tracking, so it's, and I appreciate where the question is coming from to some degree, is how do you understand where people are at that skill level? So if you pick a particular topic, how are you going to control that? A lot of it's done by assessments and things. And although there are, there's been some great examples, we did look at various different ones. Pluralsight was mentioned as well, which we ended up going with. But the CBT nuggets and things where you can do the training and development, but you need to then tie that to things like assessments, so you can understand where people are at that skill level, so you can correctly grade people as they progress. The problem is sometimes we do a lot of vendor specific stuff, so quite often we're then utilizing the vendors own training programs and their own certification plans to see where people are at in terms of their journey. So it is a bit of a hybrid mix of different pieces to see where they're progressing on that skills level. But if you can get a platform then that does a lot of the key skills, then that's great.
I have
Yeah,
one other thing to add to that, if that's okay. Shout out to Cyber Drain SIP for running the CTF event every year. We've actually been talking about building, and we've got like a sketch of all the stuff that we're gonna do about practical applications of the stuff that we train on to be able to run scenarios internally to see if people have met the level of what it is that we're doing. Also training younger staff, and also filtering out hires to understand whether or not they're there. You can do stuff like that internally as well. They allow you to, like, I can't remember what the level is of sponsorship, but you can get a copy of that from them as well if you want to run something like that internally. It's a great way to see if it's actually sticking.
All right, I'm gonna give a link to that. Thanks for calling out that. I'm also going to drop a link into Empath. This is more for MSPs, but they've developed a platform. The whole goal of them of it is to kind of take the vendor training and all sorts of training, put it into one platform so you can help with measurement and everything. I think there's one other question we wanted to get to before we announce the raffle. You want to take this one, New York? It's from Joe, documentation, or addressed to Joe.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was reading through that, and I was wondering a bit, Joe, maybe. So I remember you were telling us that you had the first MSP basically without this dedicated training slot, and then you had the second MSP with dedicated training slot. Did you kind of experiment with like different like lengths of dedicated training time, and did you feel like some training time might be too much or not enough or something like that, or was it always 1 hour per week? Or did you experiment?
Yeah, so iterations, I think it's been mentioned, iterations and measuring, I think are the key points. Is you're constantly trying things out anyway, like to see what the right balance is. Sometimes we were finding that you put people on training, but just like Amanda said, is that if you're not measuring the effectiveness of that training, you sometimes feel like you're wasting time anyway. If you're just setting time aside and people are spending time on training, but you're not seeing the benefits of that, then it's time wasted. So I think it is definitely important to measure the effectiveness. Going back to that previous point of how do you then measure where people are at their skills journey is really important. Those assessment pieces I think is important. The one other thing from that question, though, in terms of documentation and training, which is most important, I think they're both vitally important. You have to do both. Just one other shout out that I put on the chat that we found really powerful from a documentation perspective, because I think sometimes in businesses people rely on people of authority to do all the documentation, when actually what we're seeing, and same on Lindsay's point about recording videos, is that we found Scribe a really useful tool, because we've created a culture of documentation. So if anybody's going to be doing a task once, but it's going to be repeated further down the line, then document it. And so we've implemented Scribe to make it so that process of documentation is fluid, it's easy, it's quick. The downside when we try to do everything with videos is that they're quite time consuming to go back through, because you have to watch the whole video and listen to the whole video. Whereas if you use something like Scribe and get a screenshot step by step through doing it the same process, you just do the process, then at least it's a lot easier for people to follow, and you can kind of like draft up the wording. So, but they're both equally important, I think, documentation and training.
That's great, Joe. And I think we're a little bit over time here, and I know, Lindsay, you got to jump. So thank you, Lindsay, so much for taking time out to join.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
Thank you, Lindsay.
All right, York, bring us home.
All right. Yeah, I think now we're going to have the most fun part. So JP, can you come on the call and tell us who wins?
Yeah, thank you so much. If you can bring up the PowerPoint one more time, there should be a slide that shows our prize options. But thank you, everybody, for joining us on this. This is the final webinar of our August series. We'll be announcing our September series on the 27th. but I'll give you a little heads up. It's going to start on the 10th with a webcast on the benefits of MDM for MSPs. So if you're an MSP and you want to learn a little bit more about mobile device management, how we handle that here at Ninja, you're definitely going to want to clear your schedule for the 10th, and we're going to have a really great webinar on that. But for now, I just want to go ahead and announce the winner of this webinars. As you can see, they'll have the choice between either a Osprey backpack, a Theragun, or a Unikaru, which is like a backyard pizza oven, or a deck. So I'll be reaching out to the winner. But for now, let's just get some drum emojis in the chat. And the winner of this week is Jenna Stepp. So big congrats to Jenna. You'll have your choice between those items there. I'll send you an email with instructions on how to claim your prize. And we hope to see you at our next one. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.